The storm battered Blackthorn Hollow, a desolate village cradled between jagged cliffs and a sea that never slept. The wind wailed like a mourner, tearing through the gnarled trees that clawed at the sky, their branches scraping the slate roofs of crumbling cottages below. Atop the hill, Blackthorn Manor loomed, its spires piercing the clouds, a relic of a family that had once ruled this coast with iron and ambition. Now, it was a husk, its windows dark save for a single flicker in the study where James Carver sat, alone with his ghosts. It was well past midnight, the hour when the world held its breath, when the knock came, a faint, hesitant tap at the manor's heavy oak door, barely audible over the gale's fury. James's pen froze above his journal, ink pooling on the page where he'd been scrawling fragments of a life he no longer recognized. The fire in the hearth sputtered, casting shadows that danced like specters across the walls, lined with books that smelled of mildew and regret. He tilted his head, unsure if the sound was real or a trick of the storm. Blackthorn Hollow was a place where solitude was sacred, where villagers shunned the manor and its cursed name. No one knocked here, not ever. The knock came again, 3 sharp raps, deliberate and urgent. James's heart lurched, a jolt of unease breaking through the numbness that had settled over him like frost. He was no stranger to fear, he'd lived with it since his father's ruin, since the night his world collapsed, but this was different. This knock carried weight, a summons he couldn't ignore. He set the journal aside, its pages fluttering shut, and rose from the leather chair, his boots heavy on the warped floorboards. The manor groaned around him, as if protesting the intrusion, its corridors a maze of faded grandeur where memories lingered like cobwebs. He took the iron poker from the hearth, its cold weight grounding him, and descended the grand staircase, the portraits of his ancestors glaring down, stern men and hollow-eyed women whose legacy was dead in disgrace. The foyer was vast, its marble floor cracked, the chandelier above shrouded in dust. The knock sounded again as he reached the door, softer now, almost pleading, and his pulse quickened. He gripped the poker, his knuckles white, and unlatched the door, pulling it open against the storm's resistance. She stood there, a wraith in the rain, her frail form swallowed by a sodden cloak that clung to her like a second skin. Her dark hair, once golden, was plastered to her face, strands like veins against her pallor. The wind tore at her, but she stood resolute, her eyes, deep, glistening, and heavy with unspoken sorrow, locked on his. Regret radiated from her, a force as tangible as the cold that seeped into the foyer. And yet, there was a faint smile on her lips, fragile as a dying ember, tinged with sadness and a private, bitter irony that made James's breath catch. It was a smile that mocked her ruin, yet held a flicker of something alive, something he'd once known. "James," she whispered, her voice raw, barely rising above the storm's howl. "It's Eleanor." The name was a wound, its edges still sharp after 20 years. Eleanor Vance. His betrothed, his muse, the woman who'd been the heart of his youth, until the night she'd shattered him. She'd vanished without a trace, leaving only a letter, "I cannot stay. Forgive me," its words etched into his soul like an epitaph. The village had spun countless tales. She'd fled with a lover, drowned in the sea, been claimed by some ancient curse tied to Blackthorn's cliffs. James had believed none of them, though he'd spent years wrestling with her absence, his love curdling into a quiet, festering betrayal. Now, she stood before him, a shadow of the radiant girl he'd known, her beauty eroded by time, her smile a ghost of the laughter that had once warmed this frozen place. "What are you doing here?" His voice was rough, edged with anger he hadn't known still burned. He stepped back, the poker still in hand, but didn't invite her in, his gaze hard. Her smile faltered, but her eyes held his, unyielding despite the storm-battered frame. "I have nowhere else to go," she said, her words trembling like her body. "Please, James. Just for tonight." He wanted to slam the door, to leave her to the storm and the pain she carried. He'd rebuilt himself in her absence, brick by brick, a life of solitude and scholarship, piecing together the Carver family's secrets in the manor's dusty archives. But her gaze, raw, unguarded, heavy with remorse, rooted him. She was no ghost, though she looked it, her frailty a mirror to the cracks in his own heart. Against his will, he stepped aside, and she crossed the threshold, her cloak dripping onto the marble, her movements faint but deliberate. She sank into a high-backed chair by the foyer's unlit hearth, clutching her cloak as if it could shield her from more than the rain. James shut the door, the storm's roar fading to a muffled wail, replaced by the manor's oppressive silence, thick with the weight of years. He set the poker against the wall, his hands still trembling, and studied her. Eleanor had been a vision, golden curls cascading, her green eyes bright, her laughter a melody that had filled Blackthorn's gloom with light. They'd planned a life together, a quiet wedding in the village church, a home by the shore, children who'd run free of the manor's curse. But she'd been restless, her dreams too vast for Blackthorn Hollow, and he'd been too naive to see how the village's stagnation choked her. Now, she was a stranger, her hair dulled, her face lined, though her eyes still held that spark that had once set him alight. "You're half dead," he said, his voice flat but not unkind. "Stay here, I'll get you something warm." He didn't wait for a reply, turning toward the kitchen, needing distance to grapple with the impossibility of her return. He climbed the stairs to fetch a blanket from a cedar chest, its scent stirring memories of winters spent with Eleanor, reading poetry by the study fire. In the kitchen, he stoked the hearth and boiled water for tea, his movements mechanical as his mind churned. Her absence had shaped him, her letter had turned him inward, away from the world, into the manor's shadows. The villagers called him cursed, the last carver doomed to rot in his ancestors' tomb. He'd let them think it, preferring their fear to their pity. But Eleanor's return, what did it mean? A reckoning, a chance to heal, or to break again? He returned to the foyer, finding her unchanged, staring into the dark hearth as if it held answers. He draped the blanket over her shoulders, her frame sinking slightly under its weight, and set the steaming tea before her. "Drink," he said, pulling a chair across from her, his voice firm. "Then talk." She took the cup, her fingers trembling, and sipped slowly, wincing as if the heat seared her throat. For a long moment, she was silent, her gaze lost in the shadows, the faint smile lingering like a half-forgotten promise. When she spoke, her voice was low, threaded with a despair that seemed to echo the manor's own. "I never meant to come back," she said. "Not like this. Not broken." Her smile flickered, bitter and fleeting. "But the world has a way of stripping you bare, James. It takes everything, your dreams, your pride, and leaves you with nothing but regrets." He leaned back, his jaw tight, the anger simmering beneath his calm. "What happened, Eleanor? You left me, left us, without a word. You owe me the truth." Her eyes met his, and he saw the ledger. Of her life in them, every choice, every loss, written in tears she refused to shed. "I was young," she said, her voice steadying. "Foolish. I thought Blackthorn Hollow was a cage, that its cliffs and its curses would swallow me whole. I wanted more, a life beyond the sea, beyond the whispers of this place. I thought I could be someone else." She sipped the tea, her hands steadier now. "I went to Brightport first, the city of lights and promises. It was dazzling, streets alive with music, markets spilling with color. I thought I'd find my place there, but I was naive. I met a man, Victor Hawthorne, a scholar with a silver tongue and eyes that saw my hunger. He promised me knowledge, a chance to study the world's secrets. I followed him, thinking it was freedom." James's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms. He'd heard fragments of this tale, Selah's gossip, a woman matching Eleanor's description seen with a man of wealth. "Go on," he said, his voice hard. Her smile faded, her gaze dropping to the cup. "Victor was brilliant, but cruel. He wanted my mind, my ideas, but not me. I worked with him, pouring my soul into his research, ancient texts, forgotten histories. But he took it all, published it under his name, and when I demanded credit, he laughed. He called me a village girl, unfit for his world, and cast me out. I was left with nothing, no money, no name, only debts I couldn't pay." She set the cup down, her hands folding tightly in her lap. "I tried to start over. I worked as a governess in a cold manor much like this one, teaching children who feared me. I was a scribe in a port town, copying letters for merchants who leered. When things grew desperate, I sang in taverns, my supper, my voice breaking under the weight of it all. But every step, I carried Blackthorn with me, its shadows, its guilt. And you." Her voice cracked, and she looked up, her eyes glistening with tears now. "I never left you, James. Not in here." She touched her chest, where her heart beat faintly beneath the cloak. "Then why now?" he asked, his voice softer, though the anger still lingered, tempered by her rawness. "This place is no haven. You know that." Her faint smile returned, the saddest thing he'd ever seen. "Because I'm dying," she said, her words stark and unadorned. "The city's air, the years of hunger, the cold nights, they've taken their toll. My lungs are failing, the doctors say I have months, maybe weeks. I came back to face what I left behind. To see you, if you'd let me. To make things right, if I could. James's breath caught, a pang of grief piercing the anger. He wanted to rage, to demand why her apology should matter after years of silence. But her frailty, her unflinching honesty, disarmed him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her face, the lines etched by hardship, the spark in her eyes that refused to die. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice raw, the question heavier than he intended. Her smile held, fragile but resolute. "Nothing," she said. "Just a place to rest. A moment to feel safe. And this." She reached into her cloak, her movements slow, and pulled out a small, leather-bound book, its edges frayed, its cover stained by years of travel. "It's my journal. Everything I saw, everything I learned. It's not much, but it's yours, if you want it." He took the book, his fingers brushing hers, the contact a spark that stirred memories of stolen kisses by the cliffs, of promises whispered under starlight. He didn't open it, only held it, its weight a tether to the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. The firelight flickered between them, the manor's shadows deepening, and he saw her anew, not the betrayer, but a soul as broken as his own. "Stay," he said, the word escaping before he could stop it. "Until the storm passes. Longer, if you need." Her eyes softened, a tear slipping free, and she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, the words a fragile offering. They sat in silence as the storm raged on, the manor creaking like a ship at sea. Eleanor slept eventually, her breathing shallow, her faint smile lingering like a half-remembered dream. James watched her, the journal heavy in his hands, and wondered if regret could bridge the chasm of years, if forgiveness was a gift he could give. Morning came, gray and still, the storm reduced to a drizzle. The chair was empty, the blanket folded neatly, the journal on the table. A note lay atop it, in her trembling hand. "Forgive me, if you can. I loved you always." James stood at the door, staring into the mist that cloaked the cliffs, her smile burned into his memory, a faint, fleeting thing, covered only in regret. He opened the journal, its pages filled with her words, her truths, and began to read, each line a step toward understanding, if not absolution.